Bishop Curry.
You are very kind. You didn't have to do that unless you just needed a stretch break.
So let me do a quick, am I on? Oh yeah, okay, great. Eric, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to share some time with you. I have to say that I really do, this gives me a chance to say thank you on behalf of a whole host of bishops. I know what you do. Believe me, I know what you do. And two of the people, when I was, some years ago, when I was in North Carolina, we, you know, how you go through periodically. I was there for 15 years. So over time, you do these restructuring and reorg, and you get, you know, a high fancy consultant to come in and kind of tell you so. But this, I think we actually did it. I mean, that's a very good thing. It's fine, but this time they did it slightly different. The standing committee said, why don't we get somebody who does this, but who will shadow you? And I said, why do you want to shadow me? They said, because we want to understand your style and what it is, what will be needed to affect that style and the style of the culture of the diocese to be its most effective. And actually, that really made a lot of sense. The end result was, they said, you know, you need two people around you who basically connect you to everything in the system. I said, that makes some sense. And so, I don't remember what the consultant came up with. I said, well, we're probably talking canons. And they said, typically it's canon to the ordinary. And it's something to say, well, we're really talking two canons to the ordinary. And I thought, is that possible? I see Bishop Mathis in the back. He's a canonist, so he probably will correct me on this. But I remember thinking, is it possible to have two canons to the ordinary? I hadn't heard of that. Usually it's embodied in one person who has to do 10 different jobs. But it's canon schizophrenic. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we did that, and we had additional canons for a variety of other things and staff, but eventually we did, and both of them are around, Marlene Weigert and Michael Hahn, and we were together a long time, 12 years, 11 or 12 years, we were able to share a remarkable ministry together that I learned from that you can't do this kind of work alone. Silos don't work except on farms. And they don't work in communities and in institutions. They don't work. And I was blessed and privileged to work with them for 11 or 12 years. And it really was a blessing. So I know what you do. And on behalf of a whole host of bishops, I thank you and just thank God for you. It's just great to be with you, and also great to be with you. Bishop Magnus is going to be talking with you this afternoon, and just a little word of introduction to him. Probably the best way to introduce Jay is, I mean, he's obviously the Bishop Suffragan for Armed Forces and Federal Ministries. I mean, that's and I have to tell you, as a diocesan bishop, I mean, I remember when vestries were fussing about, why do we have to send all that money to New York? You know, that kind of, am I being taped right now? Let me just, hold on. Oh, I am? Oh. And what a joy it is to send all that money. But I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, you all have had those discussions where, you know, you're in with the vestry and they're fussing about, oh, we got to send all that money. They wanted to say Raleigh, which was what they really want, but New York was an easier target. Why do we have to send all that money to Raleigh? One of the things there were several things I had sort of a list, a checklist of things that we do together as the Episcopal Church that we would never do just on the diocesan level or on a congregational level. And there were several things, whether it was Episcopal relief and development, you know, that there's a case that can be made that because we support the church-wide community, that enables Episcopal relief and development to make sure that out of every dollar, 92 cents goes directly to the ministry and work and is not eaten up in administrative costs. You make that pot, and they used to say, oh, well, we can do that. And I would talk about missionaries and young adult service corps and all that kind of, they said, oh, well, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I could go on about youth work and all that kind of stuff. Oh, that does make some sense. But it would invariably, I crossed the political aisle and communicated on the right and the left to red and blue when I talked about the bishop suffragan for I just used to say bishop suffragan for armed forces because they knew what I was talking. Federal ministers, they probably didn't know what that was, what I was talking about. But when I said the bishop suffragan for armed forces, who helps to support the work of Episcopal chaplains, who help to support the work of soldiers and airmen and folk who are defending this country. We have chaplains who help to make that happen. I said, now, take out your wallets. Let's send the money to New York. But people got it. They understood. And Jay has, just done a remarkable job doing that. And you can't imagine. You think the presiding bishops travel. And they do, and I'm beginning to learn that. But anyway, they do. This man lives on airplanes because he goes and spends time with our chaplains, these people who are taking care of God's people who are deployed and sometimes in harm's way, but often away from their families. You talk about sacrificial living. These people do that, and he helps to support the people who support them. And it's a remarkable ministry. And the testament, when the roll is called up yonder, when we were at, Bishop Mathis would know, when there had been a report about Jay's going to retire fairly soon, and I hope to join you in 9 years. But anyway, but there was a report from the nominating committee on the progress of that, and at some point, I guess toward the end of the presentation, the House of Bishops stood up and applauded Jay Magnus, and it just kind of happened. And I was trying to get my phone out so I could film him, and I was going to send it to Jay. He was on his way to Guantanamo, and so he had to leave early. And I didn't get it because they stopped before. I said, wait a minute, let us hold this spiritual moment. Stand up again and start clapping. And so they did, and we got it. And so I videoed it and was able to show it to him. It was Easter Eve, I guess, at the Easter Vigil at the National Cathedral. I played it for him. I said, this is what your brothers and sisters said. That's the best thank you. That's a testament to the ministry. It is a testament to this guy. And so I wanted to say that because I won't be with you this afternoon. So I just introduced the Right Reverend Jay Magnus. Yay, Jay. Yay, Jay. Thank you, brother. Wow. And my brother, Bishop Magnus, the bishop of this diocese, who again is one of our parliamentarians in the House of Bishops, and clearly people who have received spiritual gifts that I have not. And again, another testament that as the body of Christ, we can be Christ in the world. As silos of Christ, it doesn't work. And it is great to be with you, my brother. And I'll make sure they get out for lunch today. He's so bad. That was a joke from last night. Never mind. Let me say maybe some words, and I want to make sure I'm on time. Eric, when do I stop? When do we need to completely stop?
You have 10:45, sir.
What a gift. Okay, so I'm going to talk about maybe a half hour, and then I want to stop so we can have conversation. Because I'm very aware of what you do in a variety of ways. To a great extent, your ministry is to help to make the thing work. To actually, and a lot of times people don't see your ministry, won't necessarily see it. They may see the fruit, but they won't necessarily see the actual work of making the sausage. But they know they got sausage. And it occurs to me that your ministry, your role really may be critical in where we are and what we, I think, are about in this particular mission moment as the Episcopal Church. You never know. I have no idea. Well, no, I do. I have some idea. I wasn't elected presiding bishop because I'm cute. I'm getting in touch with that reality. I mean, it's all right. And I was very aware that the four of us who were nominees, these were four remarkable bishops, any one of whom would have served this church well. That's beyond question. I know them. I mean, that is the case. I'm not buttering anybody up. I'm already elected. So, it's right. But I think the church was looking for someone who could match or help to join with us in this particular mission moment. And I think that's often the case. Take ego out of it. It's what does, and I'm saying this because somebody who finally, when I was wavering about whether or not to let my name go forward in nomination, I was talking to another bishop when we were in Taiwan at the House of Bishops meeting there. And this bishop said to me, this is not the same as when you had a deep desire to be a priest. And your desire to be a priest and the church's sense that you were being called the community's sense that you were being called to this came together. He said, obviously you don't want to not want to do this, but you have to be open. This really is about what does the church need in this moment in its pastoral leadership as a presiding bishop. And that's not about what you necessarily want. You have to be open, but that's a different order. And I think that was true. It was kind of one of those spiritual direction moments, and that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to at least see what happens. I think there's a sense in which the church knows that we must embrace authentic evangelism that is in the Episcopal tradition, that is genuine and authentic to us, and genuine and authentic to the way of Jesus of Nazareth. And this church had a sense that we are in one of those moments of time when the gospel's work of reconciliation is profoundly and powerfully needed in this world. And those two things came together, and I think those bishops said, all right, this may be the one who can join with us on that journey. He might not be the one for another time. You see what I mean? But for this particular mission moment, that's what I think now. Time will tell. General Convention did something absolutely remarkable. I've been in this church all my life, baptized. We had to find my baptismal certificate when we were getting ready for the installation. So we couldn't find the actual certificate, but my godmother, who had died about 6 months ago, we found it in all her stuff. So we actually found it, Diocese of Chicago, and actually Bishop Lee told me they actually found the record eventually, and because the mission is closed, but they actually had it in the archives of the diocese. And I said, well, it should be a shrine for veneration because we can put a candle under it or something. But so we, baptized as of, those days according to the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. I mean, you were sure enough baptized that you might manfully fight under the banner of Christ, all that kind of stuff. And this is the church I grew up in. This is the church that formed me as a follower of Jesus and as a human being. That really did. So I know something. I know us because I am us. I'm part of us. And we probably don't talk, to be honest, I'm not sure that you would find many in literature, if you did a quick study, where the word evangelism and Episcopalian are actually in the same sentence. That's probably not. And yet there's something, this General Convention elevated the ministry and the work of evangelism beyond mere rhetoric, desiring reality. And the work of racial reconciliation was the specific, but I think racial reconciliation is the door. That's the gateway into a whole cluster. This convention said this is the work that we sense we are being called to do. Now, I've been in this church a long time. I have not heard it as clear, a clarion call, a clear focus of mission as that in the years that I've been a priest. I was ordained in 1978. This church that General Convention was clear. Evangelism is the work of this church. racial reconciliation and reconciliation of the human community. That is the work of this church. And I just added on, well, let's just call that the Jesus movement. And that was intentional. Because as you probably heard me say, you will over the course of 9 years, probably hear it over and over again, but Jesus didn't come to found a religion or to establish an institution. Though religion and institutions have their place, they do. Jesus started a movement. And he started a movement with the intention of changing the landscape of the world from the nightmare it often is configured as into the dream that it's intended to be. That's what Jesus was about, and he called that the kingdom of God. And I am convinced that we're just in one of these moments when that calling is really our calling. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't have stood for it. I just wouldn't. And I was rereading a book after I had my head injury. And thank you for praying during that whole time. Turned out that was the result of, I had fallen the day of the installation, running across the street and from a Starbucks. Starbucks wasn't chasing me, but I was leaving it. Anyway, I was running across the street and tripped over the curb and fell and scraped up my arm and hit my head, but you hit your head all the time. It didn't dawn on me I'd actually done something. And a few weeks later, that kind of injury apparently only shows up in about 4 or 5 weeks. It takes a little while. Michael Hunn, again, that's why I know what canons do. Who was there with me when this all happened and was watching over while I'm kind of in the hospital, but a canon. And we were at Bruton Parish Church, and I was preaching a sermon and got just completely discombobulated. I couldn't figure out, I wasn't sure, am I saying? And so I finally, I had no idea what I said, and the rector was kind enough not to distribute the tape. But Episcopalians are so wonderful. Whatever the preacher has said, they stand up when it's over. We believe in God, the Father Almighty. And they did, like nothing unusual had happened. And the surgeon in the hospital afterwards, I shouldn't be going off on tangents. The surgeon, I said, God, I feel bad for the poor people of Bruton Parish Church. I have no idea what I said. He said, Bishop, don't worry about it. The people of God have been listening to priests and preachers talk for years, and they have no idea what they said, and they just keep on going anyway. But I really do thank you for those prayers. I really do. But part of my rehab therapy, which I did once the brain was beginning to heal, and then as I started all the various therapies and stuff, one of them, I guess it's the occupation. No, it was the speech therapist, which I learned speech therapy is cognitive therapy. It's about getting the brain to function and think. It's logical thinking. And I was doing all these kind of tests you used to do in high school, where you have to do they give you a math problem with all these things, and really it was kind of fun. But she said, find a book that you've read before and then read it again. And that makes sense thinking about it. And so I did. And so I picked up a book by Charles Marsh called God's Long Summer. And Charles he teaches at UVA at Virginia, who didn't do that well in March Madness, but that's a side note. And he's a theologian and a Bonhoeffer scholar. He's published a book on Bonhoeffer. But in the course of this particular book, which studied the civil rights movement in Mississippi and I think it was the summer of '65, and it's a theological study. He talks about the life of Clarence Jordan, or Jordan, depending on what part of the country you're from. And some of y'all remember Koinonia Farm, which still exists, a Christian community that was started by Jordan in the 40s. It was founded on a community of people who were committed to living the teachings of Jesus. And so it was an interracial community in Georgia, in rural Georgia, in the early 1940s. It was a community who was committed to serving the poor and to living and following the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Well, in the course of this book and study, Charles Marsh talked about Jordan, who also had a PhD in New Testament, I believe, and Jordan, remember the Cotton Patch Bible? Remember some of that? I mean, he really was a remarkable guy. And in his translation of the New Testament, particularly of the Gospels and the Sermon on the Mount in particular, instead of translating the kingdom of God, the word kingdom as kingdom, basileia, instead of kingdom or the reign of God, he translated it as the movement of God. He said, because it is the dynamic reality that moves into the world and begins to transform it. And he goes on and says this, and I quote, this is Marsh talking about Jordan. He said, Jordan believed that there was a God movement. That this God movement, he said, was greater and deeper than even the civil rights movement. He said the God movement, the stirrings of God's might and spirit of love and peace and humility and forgiveness and joy and reconciliation in the hearts of all of us may be the closest we actually get to a dream. And some may say it is just a dream. But the only alternative to it that I can see is a nightmare. Marsh goes on to say, Jordan's God movement was a new social and world order founded on the life and teachings of Jesus. Jesus founded the most revolutionary movement in human history, a movement built on the unconditional love of God, a love for the world, and a mandate for a community of people to live that love and change the world. We are the 21st century branch of the Jesus movement. And that movement matters. Evangelism matters. Reconciliation matters. For the life of the world is at stake. There was a time when when a powerful motivator for evangelism was avoidance of the fires of hell. That's sort of in our American revivalist tradition. I mean, you look at the First Great Awakening. Remember Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hand of an angry God. I mean, it really is good rhetoric, not good theology. But it really is good. But you know, that whole tradition of the fires of hell, I mean, it's even in the medieval tradition. I mean, it's not just the revivalist tradition, but avoiding the fires of hell, which I suppose was a positive attempt to get to the positive of the hope of heaven. But that was a motivator. Folk, look, why would you want to go and burn for the rest of whatever? So come on, all you do is answer the altar call, and come on down, And so that was a powerful motivator at one time in our culture, for many, not for all, but for many. Today, I suspect that another motivator may not be, I don't think the fires of hell are much of a motivation anymore. But the perversion of that is the hope for happiness, prosperity, health, wealth, and success, and a gospel promise that, y'all know where I'm going now. And see, that's the new altar call going on in our religious culture. That Jesus can make you healthy and happy and successful, and you will prosper. That's the new motivator for many, not for the majority of the culture, but for many. And it's all over TV, and I'm here to tell you it's spreading in the developing world. It actually is, because it's actually tapping into a deep desire and hope for something better in life. I mean, it's tapping into something that needs to be addressed. But it's tapping into it with a perversion of the gospel that is so perverse, it is not even the gospel. Get real. You think Good Friday happened and Jesus said, come on with me while he's carrying the cross. Let's get healthy and happy and successful. I mean, really? It's worse than Monty Python and Jesus on the cross. Always look on the bright side of life. I mean, it's just, that's not the gospel, right? It doesn't sound like the gospel of the one who said, whoever would be my disciple, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So hell is not going to be a motivator. Happiness is not really a theological, biblical, gospel motivator. But I do think this message matters. And there is a motivation. And everyone may not respond to it. It may have a smaller market share. But I think the great motivator is that this movement matters to the very life of the world and the real hope of us all and for the very planet on which we live. St. Paul, I think, was getting to it when he said in 2 Corinthians, "For the very love of Christ urges us on, because we are convinced that one has died for all, therefore all have died. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. Behold, everything has become new. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and who has given us the ministry of reconciliation." That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself and has given to us the ministry of reconciliation. This movement matters. It matters profoundly to the very life of the world. I was invited to speak at the National Press Club, which I think, I'm sure Frank Griswold had, and I know Catherine had. And so I was invited to speak at the National Press Club and then take questions and that kind of thing. And it was, I knew, there would be Episcopalians were involved, so I knew, part of the family was there, but I also knew it was probably speaking to a greatly secular audience, or not necessarily Episcopalians or not necessarily Christians. And so I was trying to think through a way to enter into this, because they want to know, what is this Jesus movement thing? And, what are you really talking about? And a friend of mine from college had recently sent me a copy of a book by Jonathan Sacks, who was the former chief rabbi in Great Britain for a number of years. And he was there with us when we were at Lambeth in 2008. And he's just a remarkable guy. But he's got a new book out entitled, which is very current. The title of the book is Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence. And it's a magnificent, you want to see some exegesis of Genesis? Get a rabbi to do it. See, it really is. It's almost a midrash, it's a riff on Exodus. And it is just masterful. But it's not just biblical study up there in the air. It's tied to the roots of religious violence and animosity. And nobody gets out clean. Nobody. Not Judaism, not Islam, not Christianity. I tell folk all the time, don't you get on no Muslim trip, because I know about hooded riders in the night, and they weren't Muslims, burning crosses. All our religious traditions that got our issues, right? Yitzhak Rabin was killed by an Israeli nationalist. Mahatma Gandhi was killed by a Hindu nationalist. Anwar el-Sadat was killed by a Muslim nationalist. And the KKK claimed to be Christians. Nobody gets out of this one. All have sinned. And all fall short of glory. Well, anyway, that wasn't supposed to be in. I just added that. But anyway, Rabbi Sacks goes on, and at one point, he says something that just blew me away. And I just want to share it with you because I think it gets it. He's talking about Christianity in the West, and you've got to remember he's in Great Britain, so he's writing from that perspective. But I think it has applicability here in the continental U.S., and I think generally in the West. But he says, and I quote, "The old marriage of religion and culture has ended in divorce. Today, the secular West has largely lost the values that used to be called Judeo-Christian, and instead, it has chosen to worship the idols of the self. The market, consumerism, individualism, autonomy, my rights over yours, and whatever works for me. Then he says, the golden calf of the self has been raised once again by the children of Israel in the wilderness. God went off and Moses went off. Remember the story in Exodus? Or you remember the movie, remember Ten Commandments? Remember when Charlton Heston was coming down with the tablets? Remember he broke the tablets because the Israelites were dancing and playing with this golden calf. Why would God go off like that? Why did Moses go off? Because this golden calf of the self is the most destructive reality in all creation. If anything could destroy this very creation, it is that golden calf of the self. That's what the old ancient ones talked about as original sin, this hubris, this false pride that sees the self. It's kind of a reverse Copernican. Remember Copernicus, right? The sun is the center of the universe. Wasn't that Copernicus or Galileo? No, that was Copernicus, right? And remember, guess who opposed him? The church. Yeah. That he had the audacity to suggest that we aren't the center of the universe, and it is that the sun is the center. We're not the center of this world, and this reverse Copernican revolution, where the self is the center of everything, where it is all about me. It is destructive. It is vile. It is the essence of evil, and it will destroy this planet if it is not checked. It destroys families, destroys communities, destroys churches, nations. It can create the kind of fear that Bishop Jim told us last night. That fear is not an option. And left unchecked, it will destroy this earth. This idol of the self cannot be allowed to become the object of our worship. This movement matters because this Jesus movement shows that there's another way. Are y'all okay? I'm doing a quick chair. You okay? See, I follow Jesus because I really believe the brother got it. He got it right. I mean, he's the Lord, so he should. But if you, Jesus clearly, God knew what God was doing. Jesus clearly grasped this, because if you look at how Jesus talks, especially during Holy Week, he literally counters this selfish, self-centered idol with sacrificial love, which is the exact opposite of that self-centeredness. The way of Jesus, the way of the cross, the way of sacrificial love is the way to life. It's during Holy Week that Jesus told the lawyer, when the lawyer asked, which is the greatest commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law. And that was in Holy Week. Shadow of the cross. It is in Holy Week. No, not even just Holy Week. It is at the Last Supper. In John's Gospel, as we had from the Gospel last night, at the Last Supper, that Jesus says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples. No, not that you can recite the Nicene Creed. I believe the Nicene Creed, just in case there's any question. I don't but the truth is, that's not how the world's going to know that you are my disciples. They're going to know you're my disciples, that you love one another. As the Father has loved me, he says, so have I loved you. Now abide and dwell in that love, because that love will help you deal with hard times. That love will help you move forward. That love will be the reason for you moving forward. That love will lift me up when the world will cast me down. My old grandma used to love to sing that song. Remember that word? Jay, you know it. I was sinking deep in sin. Y'all remember this? Far from the distant shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters he lifted me. Now safe am I. Oh, love lifted me. Love lifted me when nothing else would help. Love lifted me. Now Jesus understood that the love of God lived through us will liberate us all to live. And that's why after he was raised from the dead, Jesus ran into old Peter. Peter said, Lord, you want me to write a creed for you? Jesus said, no, I'll get Constantine to do that in a few years. And Jesus said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me? Simon Bar-Jonah, do you love me? Yeah, I do. Now you can follow me. Because love, not Hallmark love, the love of God can transform this world, can transform us, and can set us all free. And that, my friends, is the message of evangelism. That is the work of reconciliation. That is the Jesus movement. And that movement matters. Well, how am I doing time-wise? I should.
All you need.
Look at the bishop. Get thee behind me, my dear Satan. Bishop Matthews back there. No, don't do it. No. This is. I think it was Brian McLaren who said this. I think he said it at Lambeth. I'm not absolutely sure where I heard him say it, but I think it was when he addressed us at Lambeth in 2008. He said something like, he said, he wasn't talking about evangelism specifically, but he said, I really do believe that people who are committed to living the teachings and in the spirit of Jesus of Nazareth actually change themselves and can change the world. I think he's right. I really do believe that folk who, I'm not talking about the cultural stuff, who really striving to live out the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Really. Read what the brother said and how he said it, and how he related to people. And you won't have to be ashamed of this Episcopal church. You won't. Bishop Nathan Baxter, retired Bishop of Central Pennsylvania, when we were at the House of Bishops, our last retreat gathering, he I think he asked for a point of personal privilege. I can't remember what he was. He had something he wanted to say, and we all know Nathan well enough to know that you think I'm long-winded. Anyway, he had to preface whatever the point was that he was making. He told the story. I think I've got it right. He said, there were these two brothers who had some ice cream, and the older one had more of the ice cream than the other one. I guess the mother put the bowl in the middle for him, and the older one took charge and basically had most of it for himself, and the younger brother didn't have anything, have enough. And so the mother happened to come near, and the younger boy said, Mama, he took all the ice cream. And the mother came in, she was, one of these Christian folk, and she came in and said, now, children, now you know we're Christians. They said, yes, Mama, we know we're Christians. And Christians follow Jesus. Yes, Mama, we follow Jesus. And we always ask ourselves the question, what would Jesus do? They say, yes, Mama, We ask ourselves that question. And now what would Jesus do? Well, he would share with his brother, and he might even give it all to his brother. Good boy. So mama went on away. And the older brother said to the younger brother, okay, you be Jesus today. The way and the teachings of Jesus is a game changer. It is a game changer in our personal lives, in our interpersonal lives. It is a game changer in our social and our political lives. It is a game changer in our church lives. It is a game changer in the Episcopal Church. It's a game changer, help me Jesus, in the Anglican Communion. It is a game changer. Jesus is a game changer, not the cultural Christ, but the Jesus who said, blessed are the poor and the poor in spirit. That Jesus is a game changer. And living the way of that Jesus and imbibing the Spirit of God that was in that Jesus is a game changer for us all. And nobody loses. So I'm going to stop there. Probably should stop right there. And invite you into some conversation about how to make this movement happen and to nourish it and encourage it to the point that 10 or 12 years from now, when people hear the word Episcopalian, they won't worry about how to spell it. But they'll think about the love of God we've known in Jesus. And they'll know that's us. How can we help to make that happen? It's already happening. But so that it becomes our brand for real. You guys know how to make stuff happen. I know what you do. How could we actually help to encourage that in congregations and institutions? Let me give you some hints. Michael Hunt helped me with this part. He's in the back. He's back there. He said, if you think about the essence of a movement, movements are relational realities. I mean, they're people-driven. You obviously need resources, but they really are people-driven, and that's why they're so nimble and flexible, because they are. And he said, you think about Jesus, Jesus gathered a bunch of people around him. I mean, they were dysfunctional and wacky, but they were people. He gathered them around. He was in relationship with them. He taught them over time. They learned from him by being in relationship with him, and in time that spun into a movement that you couldn't just stamp it out even by crucifixion. And if you look at Paul, you find the same thing, the early Christian movement. I mean, it's people. Think about all the epistles. When you get to the end of the epistle, get all these names of people. Oh, yeah, tell Mary Jackson I said hello, and her husband can go to hell. But, all that kind of stuff. I mean, you get all this kind of stuff out of Paul. What you've got there are those network of relationships that are driving this movement. It's these relationships. I mean, my favorite one is in 1 Corinthians, where I did stop the sermon, but but that in 1 Corinthians, where the church is all in the factions and stuff, and Paul says, "It has been reported to me by Chloe's people that there are factions among you." I mean, y'all know Chloe; she's at every church, right? Right? She's in every church. I mean, these are people that Paul, He's writing letters to people in churches because a movement is a network of relationships of people who share a common commitment and a common cause, and they keep going together, and they will have communal and institutional parts of them, but the essence of the movement's in those relationships, which is why Jesus said to Peter, "Do you love me?" He was asking him relationship. That's what's going to fuel this thing. How can we foster that throughout the Episcopal Church? Now, in your diocese. What do you think? Now, I'm willing to talk about anything you want to ask questions about. What do you think about that? How would we? What do you think? Yeah. Do you need mics? Do we have?
I'm Mary June Nestler, the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Utah. Sir, my heart is moved. Why is your sermon, your presentation, your words that have so touched us not the very first thing that people see when they go to episcopalchurch.org? I want that to be front and center when I send my friends in Utah to learn about the Episcopal Church. And so one of the ways that we must move forward with inviting people into relationship is with, in my opinion, a far better use of those extraordinary ways that the world now makes connections. And I believe that you are among us as our leader because you are able to do that in a forum and way that the world is ready to listen to through the media that we now use to do that. So I hope we will reconsider the way that the Episcopal Church presents itself to the world in our online presence.
Good point. We can do that throughout the community. I mean, actually, every diocese. And to think of websites as, or not just websites, but all of the media, the primary task is not simply to dispense information, but to lift up the movement of Jesus. That's, yeah, get it. I get it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Bishop Curry, I'm Ed Jones. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Diocese of Virginia. And just to build on that earlier comment, I think you're right about why you were chosen as the presiding bishop. I think it does have to do something about this time where we are. And I'm also a deacon assigned to a little church in Colonial Beach, Virginia. And we talked about some of these ideas involving evangelism and also reconciliation. And we talked about having a parish discussion group on a topic. And so we asked people, what would you like to talk about? And by far the winner was Crazy Christians by Michael Curry. So we have a parish book study that's been going on for several weeks now that's infusing new energy into that parish that has to do with what you have to say about things. And I think we do need to look for ways to help you in your ability personally to convey this message so well. And on a broader scale in the Diocese of Virginia, we have been involved with the very ambitious racial reconciliation initiative. And we started off on the diocesan level, and now it's more decentralized because we feel like a lot of seeds were planted, and now we're seeing in regions and in parishes in forms that are very much attuned to their communities some great ideas coming up for how that reconciliation can go forward.
Would you say something about, I know some of it.
Yeah.
Tell them what you do.
Well, basically what we started off with some diocesan scheduled listening sessions in which we talked about, we had interracial groups involving not only our churches and parishes, but also broader ones involving the community. And we used them as a way to frankly get to know each other and break down some barriers. And from those 7 or so diocesan listening sessions came a number of ideas that have been communicated around the diocese that are now being taken and used in various ways by the individual parishes. And we feel like there's a real momentum that has developed. So I guess my 2 points have to do with that initiative, but also the personal role you play, and from a very practical standpoint, how we can piggyback on that by using your words and your presence to push that movement forward.
Thank you.
Hi, Bishop Curry. I'm Michael Pipkin. It's good to see you
Hello,
again.
Michael. Good to see you again.
I serve as Missioner for Missional Management and Canon of the Ordinary in the Episcopal Church in Minnesota. You asked a question, which was, how can we, in our role, support and serve the Jesus movement? I'm paraphrasing. And I'd like to actually say my understanding of that, everything I learned about God's mission, perhaps I learned from the Marine Corps. I served as a Navy chaplain. Hi, Jay.
Oh, yeah.
And my first assignment was as the chaplain to 2nd Maintenance Battalion, which was the largest at the time battalion in the Marine Corps. And the role of the Maintenance Battalion was to ensure that all of the movement and the mission, as it were, and I'm sort of bastardizing the phrase, right? But the mission itself had the support and sustainability it needed to continue going forward without having to worry about when the food was going to come or where the gas was going to come or whether or not things would work. And we see that moment at the moment, Jesus is on the mount, the 5,000 are there, and the movement needs food. And in that moment, there's a sense of how are we going to feed them? And Jesus says, you feed them, right? That the movement as it sat on the mount needed the support, it needed the love, it needed somebody with an organizational brain to figure out how this is going to happen. And we've understood that to be a miracle, and I don't want to take that away, but the truth is that the movement needs us. The movement needs people in the positions where we are to think about the things that keep the movement rolling forward. Will things work? Do we have the resources we need? Do we have the basics covered so that they can go on and do the work of reconciliation? They could go on and do the work that Jesus has called them to do. That's how I understand it.
But they're passing.
Hi,
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
Janet Wheelock. I'm working here in the Diocese of San Diego, and thank you so much for your words. You've reminded me of, I have been in the church for approximately 2,047 years, and 47 of those ago, I was asked by the bishop that I was serving at the time to attend the Bishops' Conference on Urban Ministry. And at that, it was really several decades, 2 decades ago, and at that conference, I was, my eyes were opened in an enormous way by the simple message of the whole conference that said, it was a conference for bishops, and I was representing the bishop, and it said, the conference said, you as bishops need to volunteer in your communities in order to live out the gospel and to show the world what you're doing. And show them Jesus' life. And I came back to the diocese and told them that, and one person after another said, I'm sorry folks, but we're too busy. And that has been a struggle my entire life as a full-time parish leader, and I have struggled with being too busy to get my hands dirty, to get out in the world volunteering. And your message is about not being too busy in my mind and getting to the real basics of what we're about. Thank you.
You just get down to the nitty-gritty. You actually did. Finding ways to do what is important and necessary to maintain. I think sometimes the chasm between maintenance and mission is a little bit overstated, because you ain't gonna have no mission if you ain't maintained something. And missions don't pop out of thin air. But finding, and I'm avoiding the word balance because I don't know what that means, to be honest. My wife would tell you, no, he doesn't. But anyway, but to see, I think we're all going to be doing this. What you just talked about, I think. We've been given job descriptions. Whether they're stated or not, whether they're in a letter of agreement or not, we've all been given job descriptions. And I learned in the 15 years that I was Bishop of North Carolina that the job description that I was given wasn't actually the job I was meant to do. Now, the community helped me learn that. I'm no oracle or Delphi. I didn't just kind of. I have a feeling in this mission moment, we are going to have to rewrite our job descriptions so that what must be done in order to care for the community as it is done. But what must be done to carry this mission forward, this movement forward, that gets on the plate and becomes the priority. I don't know if you can do that on your own. It may be that, I forgot, was it Kurt or who talked about the importance of being in a community like this, where you help each other to do that, or some small grouping of accountability and support that helps us do, because we're actually going to be swimming against a current. We all are. The church is. And we can't do it by ourselves. We just can't do it by. But together we've got the capacity to. I was talking to Wally yesterday about, this is probably, never mind, I'll stop that. You're right. And this community may be a community that can help you do that together, because I think that's critical. It's critical for us as bishops. We're working on it. We're not there. But I think we've all got to go there. You hit where the rubber may meet the road. Thank you. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
Bishop McCurry, Karen Schomburg, Episcopal Diocese of Spokane. I was wondering if you could nuance for us a little bit, because I think it'd be helpful for this group of leaders to talk about the difference between the Jesus movement and reconciliation, and maybe the more fear-based idea of we need to grow the church, we need to get more butts in the pew. Because I do think that there is a nuance there, that the relationship building that I'm hearing you talk about today, and the engagement with our brothers and sisters, seems broader than just growing the church.
It is. Much broader. That's not to say growing church is bad. It's not.
No,
it's good. But the motivation for, excuse me, I'm sorry, I keep hitting you. You're Joanne. Sorry, I've been stepping on Joanne's toe and chair for, I'm sorry.
It's my privilege.
That's pretty good. It's interesting because I'm beginning to see more that that evangelism and the racial reconciliation pieces are part of the same package, or sides of the same coin, which is to say, evangelism and reconciliation are the ministry of reconciliation. That's why I pulled out that 2 Corinthians 5 piece. Because Dorotheus of Gaza, one of the early church people, I'm not Frank Griswold, who would know all those guys off the top of his head. I read about Dorotheus, good old Dorotheus. I'm not even sure if it was a male or female, but anyway, good old Dorotheus in the 6th century Gaza. In one of I read this in Roberta Bondi's book, To Love as God Loves. It said that God has created the world as though it is a wheel with spokes going from the rim to the center. That's the creation. But that God is that center. And that we are on the different spokes. The closer we get to the center, the closer we get to each other. The work of reconciliation is to bring us closer to the center, which brings us closer to each other. Evangelism is about helping each other find that center and be in relationship with it, which also means to be in relationship with each other, which is where the reconciliation piece comes in. When we think of evangelism and reconciliation work in that way, as the work of God reconciling the world to himself in Christ, then our only job is to facilitate that process, but not to control the end result. This is the parable of the sower kind of stuff. We don't control the end result. I suspect there are going to be more Christians out of that. But that's not the reason for it. And I'm not worried about it. I just want to get folk back to God. and back to relationship with each other. And I believe Jesus has shown us how to do that, but it is not my job to figure out whether you're supposed to be a Christian at the end of that or a Muslim. That's God. That's above my pay grade. Right? See? And that, I mean, it's, I know I probably would get in trouble. Was that on tape too? Oh, well, okay. But I really believe that. It's not our job to determine the end result, but it is our job to bear witness and to help each other along the journey.
That eliminates the fear, right? Because you're not trying to control the outcome. You're letting God.
Yes. Yes. And I dare say there will be a few Episcopalians in that mix. And it'll probably be a few more of them. But that's not the reason. Yes. Thank you.
I'm John Rawlinson, and I'm an interloper here, not a member. I'm here to do a workshop.
Oh.
That said, it has always seemed to me, well, biblically, priesthood is rooted not in the cultic practices of the temple, but in the elders of the Sanhedrin and of the synagogue. Elders have wisdom. Elders deal with meaning, not cultic practice. It seems to me the priesthood of all believers, by baptism and later by ordination, is rooted in meaning, not in cultic practice. Cultic practice is a mere symbol of the meaning. And coming close to the hub is coming close to meaning. One of my concerns for a long time, since the struggles over ordination of women through current sexuality and issues and all of that, is that internationally, the Episcopal Church has presented itself in terms of doing what is necessary and right and divinely called for in practice. But I don't sense from any of the comments, any of the media, any of what I've heard from various primates and that they have heard us do meaning. That is, how and why have we taken these actions? And how is the call of God and righteousness embodied in the actions we do? So that we put action before meaning and have not functioned in a priestly way in the communion, while essentially our action is rooted in the priestly experience of meaning and embodying it. Now that's a whole complex, but...
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I want to chew on that some more. Thank you.
I promise not to say anything bad. So I have really been struck by, so last night we heard from you, Bishop, and he said, fear is not an option. And this morning we heard from the head of General Theological Seminary, who said, you know, we kind of have to break down our silos and let go of the fear of owning what we each own. And then we heard you just say, okay, this is the way we're going to sum it up. This is what Jesus told us to do. And so I'm wondering how you might help us in face of frustrations of small little congregations that just want to keep going because I need to be buried here, I built this church, how you might help us translate that into a pastoral reality of the transition time, which I think that's where our church is right now, is in the transition time. And so your lead is phenomenal. I mean, that's what the church called you to do. But I have been struck by how the last 3 messages that I heard, and I'll be interested to see if it goes further, but how the last 3 messages I've heard have actually heard your message. And so, at least in this little conclave of people here, we're hearing it. So, you know, now we need to go out and do, because we are the people, as Michael Pipkin said, we're the people who are going to do that. because we are the children of God.
Let's poke the wisdom of the room. Do y'all hear what she's asking? What do you think? Because you've got this, I think it's partially related to what you were pointing at earlier. I mean, there's some cultural, there's some realities. You know, there will be, we're going to be in a time when the whole system is going to be recreated. And it won't always be pretty. It's scary. I mean, I remember, all right, I probably should, my wife won't see this, but I remember when our kids were born, it was not pretty. I mean, from my perspective, I was standing there and not in any pain, but I mean, it was messy. And it was tough. And there was pain, and there really was. All this birth doesn't happen painlessly. And we're in one of these birthing times when the old is going to be reconfigured, and it's not going to be tranquil, like that prayer that I do love, but it's not going to be in tranquility that it's going to be recreated. It's going to be tough stuff, hard work, differentiated leadership. Rabbi Friedman is my friend. I'm telling you that the brother got something. Pay attention. It's. I haven't read all the stuff because I didn't understand all of it, but I try to get Michael Hunt to summarize it for me so I can understand it. You know, it's like, tell me a fable and I'll remember. But I think that's where things like where there are churches that are no longer able to be worshiping communities of faith. We're going to be consolidating churches or creatively collaborating with churches and institutions. The whole system is about to go through a complete remake. It's gonna. Now, I'm not saying I wanted it. I mean, I really would like a nice, quiet 9-year. Just kind of ride off in the sunset and go on. That's not gonna happen. I mean, so how do you, on the one hand, enable how do you become a midwife? That's it. That's it. I'm sorry. Extroverts think out loud. That's it. How do you become a midwife to help the birth? Knowing that in the process of the birth, something's going to have to die. Something has to be not left behind, but you know what I mean? I don't want to get too metaphorical, but you know what I mean. And somehow you are the people who have to do both. Both midwife the new life into being and help what served once but no longer serves, and to let it go. And that's hard work, and you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. None of us can. I'm not completely answering your question, but I can see, because I don't think there's a quick answer, but I think that's heading in the direction.
Good. Hospice honoring what we used previously plus the midwife part.
Give her a mic. Where is the mic? Oh, yeah. Say that again, Megan. That's good. No.
Just encapsulating in my own mind being a hospice chaplain to honor and have the dignity and value of what has come before, and also simultaneously doing that work of labor and delivery and bringing forth the new.
Yes. I heard a bishop at one of our House of Bishops meetings do a meditation and said part of our ministry is hospice care for some congregations. And you love and you help the saints pass over. And part of it is birthing new life. And it's all in yes, thank you. That's it.
Bishop Cree. Amber Myers. I'm not a part of the code. I'm from University of South School of Theology. I've been so empowered by your words, both here and in other places. And I feel like I understand how to be a part of the Jesus movement as a Christian. My fear is, what about the political realm that we are a part of? And it's taboo to speak politically from the pulpit, theoretically. But I have great fear for this nation and for where we are. And I want to know where do I go to be a Jesus person in that realm? Does that make
It
sense?
makes absolute sense. You got to go into the realm, which means you got to go into Jerusalem, to the temple, where the politics happens. And I think we have some. I think we actually do have some good entrees into that, in the sense that we're fairly well networked. I think it's certainly at the national level. I mean, the Office of Government Relations is really, that's a good bunch. They really are, in the Public Policy Network of the Episcopal Church. They really are. That's a good network. One of the things they have said over and over again is that a lot of the public policy action is in state legislatures. And I know that where's Mike? I think Chuck Winder and some others are trying to work with helping dioceses and state jurisdictions to create policy networks so people can actually interface on the public policy and do the kind of advocacy, not for ourselves, but for those who don't have anybody, that don't have big lobbyists standing and speaking for them. And to be able to, and we do that ecumenically and together, because again, the silos don't work in that realm. And so I would, Chuck Winder, I don't want to overwhelm Chuck Winder's work list, but Michael Hunn's here, and he's going to be here in the next couple of days. Seriously, if there is some interest in doing the kind of organizing on the state level where the state legislatures really are impacting stuff. More, actually Washington's in gridlock. But there's stuff happening on the state level, for good or ill. And I think we approach that as followers of Jesus, not trying to make the state into a religion, but as followers of Jesus. In North Carolina, we've got some tough stuff going on in North Carolina, and my approach to state legislators was that I'm a follower of Jesus, you may be too, and a lot of times they are, and I say, Jesus taught us in the Sermon on the Mount, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not just a nice little saying. What happens when public policy is based on that principle? That I will not enact any kind of public policy that does to somebody else what I wouldn't want done to me or to my children. My friends, we'd have a different kind of politic going on then. And see, I think for those of us who are Christians, calling on others who are Christian, who may have a different perspective, to lift that up, which is the teachings of Jesus. And that's not Bible thumping. That's not trying to turn this into a theocracy. That's just saying this represents a value that we believe is important to be cherished in the body politic. It may call on the better English of some natures, it may not, but it's bearing witness. And our voice does actually matter. Well, it does, not just by ourselves. Sometimes it does by ourselves, to be honest. Jay knows. Jim, it actually does. I've been surprised. A bishop comes in and they actually pay attention. And I get nervous. I say, "Oh, I hope I got something to say now." It's kind of surprising, but they're people too, and most of them are probably people of faith in one tradition or another, which means there's an ethical antenna there somewhere. Don't assume that it's not. So I think we actually can, but I think we have to organize to do that. And that's where Chuck Winder can be helpful, because I know he's working in a couple of states now. And Michael could get you to Chuck and get him to, you want to say something?
Well, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the work that you did in North Carolina, helping to mobilize a diocesan system. With the Moral Monday stuff, but also in a way that sort of gave permission to churches and some assistance with how do you do it? Because there's often energy in the churches, but they don't have the capacity to know, like, can we do this? Are there other people? So building the network. You worked a lot on building the network, and then I'm remembering specifically the time when you went to the legislature about the immigration thing.
Oh yeah, okay.
You remember that?
I do. I'm post-brain surgery, but I remember that. Yeah, I do remember it.
Because that was a moment that was, I think, in the sense that it was the day before a major vote, and it changed, at least for a while, the values that those people heard. Because they thought Christianity was one thing, and then you and the Romans and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans all stood up and started reading the Bible about immigration.
Yeah. It was, it really was sort of interesting because it was all of us. I remember we went to see this one, but this wasn't the state, this was a congressman. And we went to see him, and I finally said to him, I said, you know, Congressman, I said, you know, the Roman Catholic bishop and I don't always agree on everything. And the newspapers used to love to articulate that for us, whether we had said it or not. But anyway, that we don't. I said, but you need to know that the Episcopalians and the Roman Catholics and the Southern Baptists all agree on this immigration issue. We welcome the stranger. And he said, I know, the Southern Baptists were here this morning. But that's the kind of thing that actually has some, and again, now he didn't completely change, but he did moderate some of his perspective. Didn't completely, but did moderate. Part of it is setting up, organizing the networks. And that is where Chuck can be helpful, because the policy networks that can be organized not around, we can't do partisan stuff, and we shouldn't. Not partisan, but around the values that we have and hold for those who may not have a voice. Immigration is sort of an obvious kind of thing. And finding those where there's common ground, and then standing there and working on those kinds of things together, both in terms, a diocese can give congregations permission to be involved in that. That's what you're talking about, to help network them into a diocesan. Because they would have trouble doing that on their own. But together, as long as we're not going partisan, together we actually have more capacity. And so organizing that network, is that what you were getting?
Yeah. And that is literally practice at building a movement instead of a collection of institutional churches, which we are built to build new church plants that are connected in the normal canonical structures of whatever. But if we're building a movement, we've got to shift kind of how we think and how we do. And actually, the politics thing, we can't do that as an institution. We're restricted as an institution from doing that. But as a movement, we can help people connect to networks and speak out on what they believe. We can do that. And it actually might help us do the Jesus movement thing too.
Yeah,
similar
that's good. Thanks, Mike, that's good.
Bishop, we have time for 2 more people, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, Bishop, I'm Steve Rutgers from the Diocese of West Missouri, Canon to the Ordinary. Bishop Field and I teach a course called Leadership Boot Camp. It's for lay, vestry, lay leaders and clergy, new clergy. And I teach the very first part. It's an 8-month course. And they have, a weekend per month. And so I teach the first class, and it's about I am. And I pull back. I'm a cradle Episcopalian from the Diocese of Lexington. And at 17, I fell off of a freight elevator and was drug up the shaft. And I'm one of those few people who have died and then come back. 2 weeks prior, my associate at the church said, well, you're active in youth and the whole bit. Why don't you consider being ordained? And I blew him off. I said, I'm going to build things and I'm going to be an architect. Well, as I'm being drug up the shaft and feeling my whole body squeezed out, the last words I uttered in this world were, I am yours. And immediately was on the elevator with this brilliant presence. I actually have experienced the peace that passes all understanding. And was told that I would come back and serve him. And so after 100 stitches and a month in the hospital, the associate came back and said, you want to talk? And I said,
yeah. Couldn't just send me a memo, right? Yeah.
Addison Hosea didn't know what to do with a 17-year-old called to orders. I teach in this first course, I am, how we are so easily. It only takes whatever is on your contact list to call you, and the propensity and political correctness to want to change who we are, for whether I'm a father, a spouse, a colleague, a friend, or whoever calls me on or texts me. And if I do it in the attitude of I am this and fill in the blank in the thousands of different ways, I can lose myself easily if I see it's just me, the ego, the big I. And the aha that kind of comes building on my experience of being out there with God and coming back is the discipline of changing how I write I am. I don't change all the different multiple thousands of relationships I have, But if I change who I am and be authentic at one core, that I can meet everybody in this room and be the same person. By changing it instead of ego to ego a me, as when the name of God was given to Moses, or how Jesus sees in his mind as he makes all those statements, I am the bread of life, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If it's ego a me, if I can discipline my mind that every action I do, every word I say, every relationship I'm in with ego a me, I am with you in this capacity, then God is present. And I am God's ambassador. And God's story is my story, and my story is living out God's story. So that's what we're trying to teach our people in West Missouri, how to change the mindset and to get out of the control issue. Because the other part is having people come back from Brazil, and I've dealt with other people in the movements that they say, well, we have the Holy Spirit. I have the Holy Spirit. And my question to everybody is, do you have the Holy Spirit? Do you? Not rhetorical, but do you?
Yes.
No, you don't. No, you don't. The question is, does the Holy Spirit have you? And so we're using the term entheos that I worked with Mary McGregor in Texas when we were writing cross points of changing, again, mindset, but using words. Your movement in this whole thing is enthusiastic. So I draw back to entheos, the Greek root, and energy, positive, uplifting. But if you go to the second word, entheos means captured by the Spirit of God. We have a lot of people who want to have the Holy Spirit. They're relegating to the co-pilot when they drive. Or the question is, do you take it for a walk or groom it, or do you change the paper in the cage where it is? The real question is, does the Holy Spirit have you? If we can get our people to think that, the movement rolls.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother.
Hi, I'm Andrea McMillan, the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Northern California. I have two things. One, around the Episcopal Public Policy Network. We're galvanizing that in the state of California now, and so if any of you who are from the diocese in this state would join me for a meal, I'd like for all of us to be at one table to continue that conversation. The second thing is, Gary's helping us, so yeah. Chuck is helping us. So around the question about how can we, from our position that we are in our diocese, help to forward these relationships, one of the questions I have is this: how are we reframing how our diocesan offices, our offices of the bishop, how do we relate differently to our diocese? How do our dioceses relate to us? And how can, that is changing too. And some of us are kind of living with the reverb of past ways of relating that are also no longer life-giving and viable, and maybe being compressed into some of those older ways of relating. And so we have a lot of agency in how we can begin to reframe that. I don't know the answer, but I think that may be where we live in some of the tensions. And I'm curious if you might you lived in that world too for quite a while, and I'm curious if you have some insights around that too.
Well, both Marlene and Michael are here, so they may chime in, and which they always did anyway. But anyway, they'll chime in. But you know what I really am aware of? We didn't have, it's not like we had a 5-point plan. What we did have was each other. And the constant work of praying and talking it, we prayed together, but praying and talking and sometimes brainstorming and sometimes getting way off in the stratosphere that didn't seem, and it was always around some real practical stuff, but how do we move forward? It was out of that conversation, it's like we were, the more we kept walking on the Emmaus Road, Jesus started showing up. And we were just talking with each other. And I don't mean to get off in the stratosphere, but that's actually what happened for us. And I have a feeling that's true for all of us in some ways, that because nobody's got the prefabricated solutions. None of us. But if Jesus wasn't lying when he said wherever 2 or 3 of y'all show up, I mean, I'm going to be there. He said it better than that, but that's what he said. Then that does mean that there is a community of wisdom where the Spirit will show up and help us to find the way in a way that we wouldn't have if it was just us siloed on our own trying to do it. And that really may be one of the keys. I'm not sure that we need a whole lot of money and a whole lot of high-priced consultants. No, I'm not against consultants, don't misunderstand. But this isn't the usual kind of stuff. We're trying to figure out what is the Spirit saying to the churches. And that's where we come together and talk it through, think it through, pray over it, fuss over it, and say, okay, let's try this. And it may work, and it may not. But that's how, I mean, that was my experience. Now, the two of them they're not saying anything, but does that help you a little bit?
It does, and one of the things I'm hearing you say is that it's okay to fail.
Absolutely.
That a culture of trying, and it may work or it may not, implicit in that is that it's okay to try things and that failure is actually an option.
Yes.
And when we make that culture available to us, then we're able to walk the Emmaus road together.
Yes. Amen.
And can I just add to that, and I think the other part of that for all of us was that we were open to the Spirit. And so that's the piece that probably is the hardest for me. But that's the piece to not own anything, but trust that God is there with the three of us as we were brainstorming, or as the staff was brainstorming things, that trust and have faith that was happening. So I think that's the other part, is that I would have ownership of something and the Michaels would say, yeah, right. And so then we'd talk it through and it would make sense, because there are people who learn in different ways, obviously. But I think that's the biggest piece, is that you trust that the Spirit is with you, and that's what's guiding what's happening. It's not me.
Community is the key.
Yep.
Actually, it's what?
We are at the end of our time, and I know everyone would love to just have you with us all day and listen to everything.
Oh, you're kind. Thank you all. God love you. You're awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys.